The moment I saw his reflection in that cafe window, my world stopped. It was a chilly evening, the kind that carries silence in the air, where even the city lights feel distant. I'd left work early, hoping to surprise him. We hadn't spent much time together lately. He always said he was too busy, too tired, too stressed. But I believed him because when you love someone, you want to believe them. So there I was, walking down Maple Street with his favorite coffee in my hand, smiling at the thought of seeing his face light up. But fate, as always, doesn't knock politely. Sometimes it just slams the door open and lets the truth walk in. Through the cafe window, I saw him sitting by the corner booth, and he wasn't alone. At first, I couldn't breathe. My brain tried to fill in excuses faster than my heart could break. Maybe it's a client. Maybe it's a friend. Maybe I'm overthinking again. But then she laughed that soft, familiar kind of laugh. The one you only give when your heart feels safe. He leaned in, brushed a strand of hair from her face, and smiled in a way he hadn't smiled at me in months. The coffee cup trembled in my hand. I wanted to look away, but my eyes refused. Every small gesture, his hand on hers, the way she gazed at him was a knife disguised as affection. I remember thinking, no, not him. He's not like that. But denial is fragile. One look too long, and it shatters. He kissed her hand, and that was it, the moment everything inside me went silent. Not broken yet, just numb. Like my body knew the truth before my mind accepted it. I didn't walk into the cafe. I didn't cause a scene. Instead, I turned around, walked away, and let the winter wind hit my face until the tears froze before they could fall. That's the thing about betrayal, it doesn't explode like fireworks. It burns quietly, like a candle in a locked room, eating the air until you can't breathe. That night, I didn't text him. I didn't ask questions. I just watched the minutes pass like strangers. Around midnight, his message came in. "Sorry, babe. Had a long meeting tonight. I'll call you tomorrow." My heart didn't ache this time. It didn't even break. It just hardened. Because in that single message, I realized two things. One, he thought I was still in the dark. Two, he had no idea that his lie was about to become my lesson. And that was the night I decided he might have broken my trust, but I was going to give him a lesson he'd never forget. I met Ethan 2 years ago in the most ordinary yet unforgettable way at a bookstore downtown. I was sitting cross-legged on the floor trying to decide between two novels when someone's voice beside me said, "Go with the one on the left. The ending's better." I looked up, and there he was tall, clean-cut with that disarming smile that makes you feel seen. He wasn't movie star handsome, not in the superficial way, but his presence had something magnetic, calm, confident, the kind of person who made crowded rooms feel a little quieter. I laughed, asking, "And how do you know that?" "Because I made the mistake of reading the other one first," he said, flashing that grin again. That's how it began, with a conversation about books, coffee, and the quiet magic of strangers connecting over nothing and everything at once. We talked for almost an hour in that aisle before exchanging numbers. He texted that same night. "So, did you pick the right book?" From there, everything felt easy. Too easy, maybe. Ethan was the kind of man who seemed to listen, not just to your words, but to your pauses, the spaces between what you said and what you couldn't. He remembered little things like how I hated mornings without coffee, or that I always carried a notebook just in case inspiration hit. I was a freelance designer then, working from home. My world was small, quiet, predictable. Ethan was different. He worked in marketing, always moving, always meeting new people. His energy pulled me out of my stillness. When we started dating, it felt like a movie montage: late-night drives, lazy Sundays, random laughter that made time blur. He'd show up at my door with takeout and say, "Let's escape the world tonight." And I believed that with him, maybe I could. He made me feel safe. That word, safe, became everything. After a few months, he introduced me to his friends, his colleagues. He'd place his hand on my back at parties, glance at me across crowded rooms like I was his calm in the chaos. And I, foolishly, thought love was exactly that, being someone's peace. My best friend, Lila, once told me, "You're glowing lately. He must be doing something right." I smiled then, not knowing that the glow wasn't love, it was trust, and trust can sometimes look a lot like blindness. After a year, he asked me to move in with him. I hesitated. I'd always been careful about giving too much of myself away, but he said all the right things that he wanted to build something real, that he saw forever when he looked at me. And maybe I wanted to believe him more than I wanted to be cautious. So I said yes. Moving in together felt like the next chapter of a fairy tale. We decorated the apartment together. I picked soft, neutral tones. He wanted modern, clean lines. Somehow, we found balance. The first few months were bliss. We had rituals, morning coffee together, late-night shows, random dancing in the kitchen. He'd call me his safe place. But the cracks, as always, don't appear suddenly. They start as whispers, small, dismissible things. He began coming home later than usual. At first, he blamed it on work. New campaign deadlines, he'd say, loosening his tie, exhaustion painted across his face. I believed him. I made dinner, waited, smiled through the weariness. Then it became a pattern. Some nights he'd forget to call. Other times his phone would buzz and he'd turn it face down on the table. I told myself not to overthink that love means trust, not interrogation. But sometimes silence is its own confession. Leela noticed before I did. "You okay?" "You've been quieter lately," she said one afternoon. "Just work," I lied. "Ethan's been busy too." "Busy or distant?" she asked, her tone careful. I brushed it off, but her words stayed. One evening, I decided to cook his favorite. Meal grilled salmon with lemon butter and mashed potatoes, something we hadn't had time for in weeks. I even lit candles. I wanted to remind him, remind us, of what we had. He was late. An hour passed. Then 2. By the time he walked in, the candles had melted down to small pools of wax. "You didn't have to wait," he said casually, dropping his bag on the sofa. "I wanted to," I replied softly. "I thought we could have dinner together." "Babe, I told you work's crazy right now," he said, loosening his tie again. "Don't start this. Don't start this." That phrase became his shield. Anytime I tried to talk about us, he'd say it gentle but final. Like my feelings were inconveniences, not warnings. A few nights later, I found a receipt in his jacket pocket, a fancy restaurant. A date I recognized. "Work dinner?" I asked, keeping my voice light. "Yeah," he said quickly. "Client stuff. You know how it is." But I didn't know. I didn't know why he looked away mid-sentence. I didn't know why there were 2 entrees, 2 glasses of wine, and 1 lie that tasted like truth. Looking back now, I realize I wasn't naive, I was hopeful. And hope can make even the sharpest eyes go blind. Still, something in me started to shift. I began noticing the small details, how he guarded his phone like a secret, how his smile no longer reached his eyes. One night, while he showered, his phone lit up. I didn't touch it. I just watched the screen flash once, twice, and the name, Clara. I remember the sound of my own heartbeat. It wasn't racing, it was steady, cold. When he came out, I smiled, pretending everything was normal. But inside, I'd already begun writing a new story, one where I stopped being the trusting girlfriend and became something else. Over the next few weeks, I observed, I listened. I asked harmless questions. How was work? How's your new client? Each lie he told, I memorized like lines from a play. I didn't confront him, not yet. I knew confrontation would only give him power, a chance to twist words, to cry innocence. Instead, I waited. And waiting, I learned, is its own kind of strength. Because sometimes revenge doesn't start with anger, it starts with silence. My silence became my shield, my patience, my plan. When he kissed me goodnight, I didn't flinch. When he said I love you, I said it back because I wanted him to believe I still lived inside his illusion. But every word, every glance, every late-night text to Clara, he thought I didn't notice I did. And I stored it away like evidence. The night at the cafe, the one where I saw them, wasn't the beginning. It was just the moment the truth stopped pretending. I had seen the signs. I had chosen trust. He had chosen deceit. And I decided, if he was writing a story of betrayal, I'd write the ending. Not with screams, not with revenge that destroys, but with a lesson, one that would make him remember me every time he looked in the mirror. Because the thing about trust is simple once broken. It doesn't disappear. It transforms. And mine was turning into something powerful. After that night outside the cafe, everything felt different. Not just in the way I looked at him, but in the way I looked at us. The innocence, the blind faith I once carried so easily was gone. Replaced by quiet observation, every word he spoke now came with a question mark. Every smile carried a weight I couldn't explain. I didn't confront him right away. Maybe part of me still hoped I was wrong, that what I saw had some logical, harmless explanation. But deep down, a new instinct had woken inside me, alert, sharp, and quietly watching. The next morning, I acted normal. I made his breakfast, like always, eggs slightly runny, coffee black with 1 spoon of sugar. He came out of the shower humming a song, phone in hand, wearing that same practiced smile that once used to melt me. "Morning, babe," he said, kissing the top of my head. "You're up early." "I couldn't sleep," I replied, keeping my tone light. He didn't notice the strain in my voice. Or maybe he did, but ignored it, confident in the illusion he'd built. He sat across from me, scrolling through his phone while I tried to read his face. There it was again, that distant look, like his mind was somewhere else. When he left for work, he gave the same excuse as always. I might be late tonight meeting with clients. He didn't realize how rehearsed that line had become. And he didn't notice how I didn't ask any questions this time. The days that followed were a quiet storm. He grew more distracted. Calls taken in another room. Showers that lasted too long. Random smiles at text messages he never let me see. But what broke me most wasn't what he said it was, how he didn't say anything anymore. The random compliments. The check-ins. The "I miss you" texts at work, all gone. It was like living beside a stranger wearing the face of someone I once loved. Sometimes I'd catch myself staring at him, trying to find the man I fell in love with. But love changes when trust breaks. It becomes quieter, heavier, full of doubt. One night, as we were having dinner, I tried to bring up our future. "So, when are we taking that trip we talked about?" I asked, pretending to sound casual. He didn't look up from his plate. "Oh, yeah. Maybe later. Work's been crazy lately." "Work's always crazy," I said softly, forcing a smile. "You sure everything's okay?" He glanced at me for a moment, long enough to notice the question behind my tone, but short enough to avoid it. "Yeah, of course," he said. "Why wouldn't it be?" I nodded, no reason. "Just asking." He went back to eating, and just like that, another wall went up between us. That night, I couldn't sleep again. The silence of the room was suffocating. His steady breathing beside me felt almost dishonest. At 2:37 a.m., I turned to look at him sleeping peacefully, phone still glowing faintly on his nightstand. My heart pounded as I reached for it. I'd never done this before, I wasn't that person. But this wasn't about curiosity anymore. It was about survival. The phone was locked. Of course it was. But in that brief moment, a notification appeared just long enough for me to catch a glimpse. A message. A heart emoji, and a name Lena. I froze. Lena. I knew that name. He'd mentioned her once, a colleague, he said. Just someone from the marketing team. But no colleague sends hearts past midnight. My hands shook as I placed the phone back exactly where it was. I lay back down, staring at the ceiling, the weight of realization pressing down on my chest. That was the moment it stopped being a suspicion. It became a truth I could no longer unsee. The following days were torture quiet, polite torture. He laughed, joked, texted, all the while pretending nothing was wrong. And I played along, mastering the art of pretending, smiling when I wanted to scream, nodding when I wanted to confront, Because sometimes silence isn't weakness. It's strategy. I started noticing things I'd never noticed before. The cologne he didn't used to wear, the shirts he suddenly started ironing himself, the way he checked his reflection twice before leaving the house. He'd begun living two lives, one beside me and one hidden from me. And in his arrogance, he assumed I was too naive to see it. One Saturday, he told me he had to visit his parents. He packed a small overnight bag, kissed my forehead, and left by noon. But something inside me said, follow him. I didn't think, I just acted. I grabbed my coat, my keys, and kept my distance as I followed his car through the quiet streets. He didn't drive toward his parents' place. He drove across town to a small apartment complex near the river. I parked a block away and waited. Watched as he stepped out, looking around, checking his phone. Then the door opened and she appeared. Lena. They hugged. Not a quick, friendly hug, but a slow, intimate one. The kind that carries familiarity. The kind that erases doubt. They disappeared inside. I sat there for a long time, gripping the steering wheel until my hands hurt. My breath trembled, my throat burned, but I didn't cry. Not a single tear. Because in that moment, something changed inside me, something cold, quiet, and determined. He thought he was in control. He thought I was still the same woman who believed his lies. He had no idea that the woman he betrayed was already planning her next move. When he came home the next day, I was calm. Too calm. He greeted me like nothing happened, setting his bag down and wrapping his arms around me. "You okay?" he asked. I smiled faintly. "Of course. Why wouldn't I be?" He kissed my cheek and headed to the shower, humming that same tune he always did when he felt safe. But as I watched him disappear into the bathroom, I knew one thing for certain: he'd never feel that safe again. That week, I began preparing not for confrontation, but for closure. I started documenting. Messages, receipts, photos, small details. I didn't want revenge born out of rage. I wanted justice born out of truth. He had built his entire life on lies. I was going to let those lies collapse under their own weight. And while he continued to lie to my face, I smiled, cooked dinner, and said I love you like nothing had changed. But deep down, everything had changed. Because now I wasn't his partner anymore. I was his mirror, quietly reflecting every truth he tried to hide. Sometimes the most dangerous woman isn't the one who screams. It's the one who stays silent long enough to let the truth destroy everything on its own. And that's exactly what I planned to do. He broke my trust, but I wasn't going to break down. Not this time. Because this wasn't just about betrayal anymore. It was about balance. About letting him taste the silence he once gave me and showing him that some lessons don't need to be shouted to be heard. It's strange how betrayal doesn't always come with noise. Sometimes it arrives quietly like a soft knock on the door of your heart, and before you know it, the world inside you has already collapsed. Days passed after I saw him with Lena. I went through the motions of life like an actress performing in a play I didn't audition for. Every smile I gave was rehearsed, every word filtered, and every moment around him felt like walking barefoot on broken glass, silently bleeding while pretending not to notice. I stopped waiting for his explanations. I already knew the truth, but knowing the truth and living with it are two very different kinds of pain. He continued his act flawlessly. Every morning, the same routine: a kiss on the forehead, a cheerful goodbye, a promise to text later. I wondered if he realized how easily lies rolled off his tongue now. Sometimes I'd watch him get ready for work, straightening his tie, fixing his hair, checking his reflection. He'd smile at himself in the mirror. I used to love that smile. Now it looked like a mask. It was painful, yes, but not the kind of pain that makes you cry. It was the kind that makes you go silent, the kind that builds something inside you. Because the moment I accepted his betrayal, something inside me stopped breaking and started rebuilding. A week later, my suspicion turned into undeniable proof. I wasn't looking for it, it found me. He had left his laptop open one morning. He was rushing to leave for another meeting, and in his hurry, forgot to close one window. A message popped up on the screen. At first I hesitated. I didn't want to see it, didn't want to confirm what my heart already screamed. But my trembling hands betrayed me, moving on their own. And there it was. A string of messages. Her name, her words, his replies. "I miss you already. Last night was perfect. She doesn't suspect a thing. Those words burned into me like fire under skin. I scrolled further, each line cutting deeper than the last. Photos, little inside jokes, a thread of affection that used to belong to me now shared with someone else. It wasn't just cheating. It was emotional abandonment, repackaged as romance. I stared at the screen, not blinking. The air felt too heavy to breathe. And yet there was no explosion, no yelling, no tears, just stillness. The kind that comes when your heart finally gives up on denial. That evening, when he came home, I was sitting on the couch, laptop closed, a faint smile on my face. He greeted me with his usual charm, dropped his keys, and asked about dinner. I nodded, calm. My voice didn't shake. "It's in the oven," I said. He smiled. "Perfect. You're amazing. You know that?" I looked at him for a long moment, studying his face, the ease with which he spoke, the warmth that felt so foreign now. And I remember thinking, how strange it is that someone can destroy your world and still look at you like nothing happened. Over the next few days, I didn't confront him. I didn't want to fight. I wanted clarity. Because confrontation gives them control, they twist, deny, gaslight. But silence makes them nervous. And it worked. He began to notice my quietness the way I stopped asking questions, stopped waiting up for him, stopped trying to bridge the gap. He'd look at me, searching for something: guilt, anger, maybe forgiveness. But I gave him nothing. And that nothing scared him more than any argument ever could. One night he asked, "Is something wrong?" I looked up from my book, smiled faintly, and said, "No." "Why do you ask?" He hesitated, then shook his head. "You've just been quiet lately." I closed the book, met his eyes, and said, "Sometimes silence says more than words ever could." He didn't know what to say, so he said nothing at all. The turning point came 2 weeks later. A moment so ordinary, yet so sharp it cut the last string of my attachment. We were having dinner at a small restaurant, the same one where he'd taken me on our first anniversary. I thought maybe he was trying to make things right. He smiled across the table, reaching for my hand. "You've been distant lately. I miss you." For a second, I almost believed him, until his phone buzzed. He flinched just slightly and pulled his hand away. "Work," he muttered, reaching for the phone. But in that half-second of hesitation, the screen lit up. "Lena, can't stop thinking about you." It was like the world slowed down. My heart didn't race. It didn't shatter. It simply stopped caring. I looked at him. He froze, realizing what I'd seen. There it was, the truth, naked and undeniable, staring at both of us. His lips parted, fumbling for an excuse. It's not what you think." I let out a quiet laugh, the kind that holds no humor. "Really? Then tell me, Ethan, what do I think it is?" He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. I stood up slowly, placed my napkin on the table, and said, "You don't have to explain. You've already said everything you needed to." The restaurant was silent. People glanced over, sensing the tension, but I didn't care. I walked out, calm, steady, my heart strangely light. Because sometimes walking away isn't weakness. It's survival. That night he called me over and over, messages, missed calls, pleas. But I didn't answer. I sat by the window, watching the city lights blur through my tears. Not because I missed him, but because I was mourning the version of myself that believed him. The one who trusted too easily. The one who loved without boundaries. The one who thought loyalty was always returned. She was gone now. And in her place stood someone quieter but stronger. The next morning, I packed a small bag and left. No note, no drama. Just silence. I moved in with a friend for a few days, needing space to breathe. I didn't tell anyone what happened, not yet, because I wasn't ready to be the girl who got cheated on. I was still becoming someone else, someone who wouldn't be defined by betrayal. Ethan tried to reach me for days. Flowers, calls, messages full of regret. At first, I ignored them. Then, one message caught my eye. "Please, can we talk? I made a mistake, but I love you." It meant nothing. Those words, "it meant nothing," broke something in me all over again. Because that's what people like him never understand. It always means something. Every lie, every touch, every excuse, it all means something. When I finally met him, it wasn't out of love or hope. It was closure. We met at the park neutral ground. He looked tired, guilty, desperate. "Thank you for coming," he said quietly. I nodded. "Say what you need to say." He took a deep breath. "I messed up. I don't know why I did it. I was confused. I interrupted softly. You were bored." He blinked. "What? You weren't confused. You were bored. You had something good, and you got curious about what else was out there. And when you realized what you lost, it was too late." He looked down. "I still love you," I smiled sadly. "Maybe. But love without loyalty isn't love. It's convenience." He looked up, eyes glistening. "Can you forgive me?" I paused for a long moment. The old me would have cried, maybe even believed him, but I wasn't her anymore. "I already have," I said. He looked relieved until I added, "But forgiveness doesn't mean return." I stood up, feeling lighter than I had in months. "You broke my trust, Ethan, and trust. Once it's gone, it doesn't rebuild. It rebuilds me." And with that, I walked away. As I stepped out of the park, the air felt new, crisp, unburdened. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't defined by what someone did to me. I was defined by what I chose next. He betrayed me, yes, but in doing so, he handed me the one thing I'd lost: my own strength. Some people think revenge is about anger, loud, messy, destructive. But real revenge? It's quiet. It's patient. It doesn't come from rage. It comes from clarity. When I walked away from Ethan that day in the park, I didn't just leave a relationship behind. I left behind the version of me who waited for apologies. For days, I said nothing to anyone. I didn't block him, didn't post anything online, didn't tell our friends the truth. I knew he was spinning his version of the story, how we grew apart, how she misunderstood things. That was fine. I let him. Because sometimes the best revenge is to let people talk long enough to expose themselves. But I wasn't done. Not yet. I wanted him to feel what he made me feel, not through humiliation or shouting, but through silence, through realization, through the collapse of the image he'd built. I started small. Ethan and I shared parts of our lives that were still intertwined: mutual friends, a few financial ties, a social circle that admired our perfect relationship. He had built his reputation on being the dependable guy, the one who was loyal, ambitious, kind. And I had been the one who supported that image quietly, behind the scenes. Now, I was going to remove that support, piece by piece. I went through the old photos, the shared posts, the digital memories, and deleted everything. Not in anger, but in purpose. Because erasing him from my story wasn't about spite. It was about space. He noticed quickly. "Why did you delete our pictures?" He texted one night. I didn't reply. 2 hours later, "Are you seriously ending us like this? After everything?" Still silence. The next day, "Please, can we talk? I just need to explain." I read the message, then archived it. Silence became my weapon, the same silence he once used to distance himself from me. But silence wasn't enough. He needed to see what it feels like when the person who held your heart now holds your mirror. So I began a plan not of destruction, but of revelation. I knew Lena worked at the same company. They had started their little secret there. I also knew that Ethan had been lying about a few business projects, often using the company's resources to fund his little getaways. It wasn't about money. It was about principle. He'd crossed both personal and professional lines. So, with quiet precision, I gathered what I needed: the emails, the expense reports he left in our home printer, screenshots of messages that connected the dots. It wasn't revenge yet. It was accountability. 2 weeks later, I arranged a meeting. Not with him, with his company's HR manager, an old acquaintance who still respected me. I didn't tell her everything, just enough to make her look closer. I showed her a few documents that didn't add up, a few messages that hinted at internal misconduct. She looked at me wide-eyed. "You're sure about this?" I smiled faintly. "I'm sure about the truth." She nodded slowly. "Thank you for bringing this forward." I didn't wait to see what happened next. I didn't need to. The truth has its own way of traveling quietly, but powerfully. That weekend, my phone buzzed again this time, not with his name, but with messages from mutual friends. "Hey, is everything okay with you and Ethan? He seems off lately. He said he's dealing with something at work. You know anything?" I didn't reply. I simply smiled. He was beginning to taste uncertainty, the very flavor he had fed me for months. But my plan wasn't about ruining him. It was about freeing myself and letting him see that the woman he thought he broke was the one who now held all the power. A week later, I finally agreed to meet him. He showed up at a small cafe, the same one where I'd first seen him with her. Fitting, I thought. Full circle. When he walked in, he looked different, tired, fidgety, eyes darting, voice unsure. He sat across from me. "Thank you for coming," he said softly. I nodded. "You wanted to talk?" He sighed. "Things are complicated. I messed up at work. Someone reported me for misconduct." He looked up, searching my face. "You wouldn't know anything about that, would you?" I raised an eyebrow. "Should I?" He swallowed. No, of course not. I don't know who'd do that." I leaned forward slightly, calm. Maybe someone who finally got tired of lies. His eyes widened. "So it was you." I didn't deny it. It was the truth. I just let it breathe. He leaned back, shaking his head. "You wanted to destroy me." I met his gaze, steady. "No, Ethan, I wanted to remind you what it feels like when your actions finally catch up to you." He went silent. The sound of coffee cups and quiet conversations filled the space between us. Then I did something he didn't expect. I took out an envelope and placed it on the table. Inside were the printed copies of all the messages, the ones that proved his betrayal. "Keep them," I said. "You'll need them to remember who you became." He stared at it, speechless. "Why are you doing this?" "Because forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means understanding. I'm not doing this to hurt you, Ethan. I'm doing it so you'll finally see yourself without the lies." He lowered his head, unable to speak. I stood up, adjusted my coat, and looked at him one last time. "You broke something you'll never get back. And maybe that's the lesson you needed." And then I walked away, not angry, not bitter, just free. The next few weeks were strangely peaceful. The calls stopped. The apologies faded. And though I heard whispers that he'd been let go, that Lena had quietly transferred to another branch, I didn't chase the details. Because closure isn't about knowing how the story ends. It's about knowing it no longer belongs to you. Still, the universe has its way of tying loose ends. Months later, I bumped into him at a bookstore. He looked smaller somehow, not physically but emotionally. The arrogance was gone, replaced by something almost human. He saw me, hesitated, then approached. "You look good," he said softly. "Thanks," I replied, smiling politely. "How have you been?" he asked. "Better," I said simply. He nodded, eyes full of regret. "I've thought about you a lot. About everything." "I hope you learned something," I said gently. He nodded again. I did. There was a pause, long, heavy, but not uncomfortable. "Take care, Ethan," I said finally. "You too," he whispered. And that was it, the real ending. Not dramatic, not cinematic. Just honest. That night, as I lay in bed, I thought about everything, the love, the lies, the quiet revenge that never needed shouting. And I realized something. The best revenge isn't about making them suffer. It's about showing them they never had the power to destroy you in the first place. Because strength isn't loud. It's quiet. It's the calm after the storm, the steady breath after the tears, the peace after walking away. And as I drifted to sleep, I smiled, knowing that his betrayal had built the strongest version of me. He broke my trust. But in doing so, he handed me my freedom, and that was the lesson he'd never forget. For a long time, I thought revenge would feel like fire, like an explosion, burning through everything in its path. But standing there, months later, watching everything unfold, I realized real revenge feels like sunrise. It's quiet. It's slow. It lights up everything that was once hidden in the dark. When I walked away from Ethan in that cafe, I thought that was the end. But endings have a strange way of echoing through time-touching places you didn't expect. A few months passed. I'd found peace in the small things again, coffee that tasted good, mornings that felt calm, silence that wasn't heavy. I'd started working on myself not to prove anything, not to win, but to heal. Yoga, journaling, long walks by the river. Things I once thought were cliché now felt like lifelines. People noticed. "You seem lighter," my friend Mia told me one evening. I smiled. Maybe I finally let go. She raised an eyebrow. Of him? Of needing closure, I said softly. And it was true. The old me would have still checked his social media, still wondered if he was happy, still measured my healing against his downfall. But now I didn't care. I had my peace, and that was more powerful than any punishment. Until one morning, the universe decided to test me. It was a Tuesday. I was on my way to a client meeting when my phone buzzed a message from an unknown number. "Hi, this is Lena. Can we talk?" For a moment, I just stared at the screen. Lena. Her. The woman who had been the secret behind all that betrayal. I didn't reply. Not immediately. I spent the entire meeting trying to focus, but her message kept replaying in my mind. By evening, curiosity got the better of me. About what? I finally replied. Her answer came almost instantly. About Ethan. It's important. We met the next day at a small cafe on the quieter side of town, not the one from before, not the place stained with old memories. This one was bright, calm, new. When she walked in, I barely recognized her. She looked drained. Not in a vengeful way, but in that hollow, exhausted way people look when they've been carrying guilt for too long. "Thank you for meeting me," she said softly. I nodded, cautious but calm. "What did you want to talk about?" She hesitated, fidgeting with her coffee cup. "You probably hate me." I said nothing. She took a breath. I should have never let it happen. Ethan made it sound like you were already done, that you didn't care anymore. I leaned back, my voice steady. He said a lot of things. Her eyes glistened. I believed him, until I saw what he did to me, too. That caught my attention. "What do you mean?" I asked quietly. She exhaled, shaking her head. "After you left, things changed. He started lying to me, too, hiding things. He even tried to use my position at work to cover his mistakes." She looked up at me, eyes full of remorse. "He wasn't who I thought he was. I wanted to tell you that you were right. I just didn't see it soon enough. For the first time, I didn't feel anger. I felt pity, not for her, but for the version of both of us that believed in his lies." 2 weeks later, I learned the rest of the story not from gossip, but from an article. Corporate audit exposes misconduct and fraudulent activity manager terminated after internal investigation. His name was there. Ethan Carter. I stared at it for a long time. The man who once seemed untouchable, the one who thought he could manipulate everyone, was now facing the public consequences of his choices. No one knew my role in it. And I liked it that way. Justice didn't need applause. Sometimes the most satisfying victories are the quiet ones, the ones where only you know how far you've come. That night I sat by my window watching the rain fall. I thought about the girl I used to be, the one who cried herself to sleep, wondering what she did wrong. And I whispered to her, "You did nothing wrong. Healing isn't linear. Some nights still hurt. Some memories still sting. But now I understood that pain wasn't permanent, it was a teacher. Every tear, every sleepless night, every ounce of heartbreak. It had forged someone stronger, wiser, quieter. A month later, fate offered me one final scene, the true climax, the moment everything came full circle. It was a charity event organized by one of our old mutual friends. I almost didn't go, but something in me said, go not for him, but for yourself. I walked in wearing a simple navy blue dress. Nothing extravagant, but it carried confidence, the kind that doesn't need attention to be felt. Halfway through the evening, I saw him. Ethan. He was standing alone near the bar, scanning the crowd. He looked different, thinner, tired, older. There was no charm, no easy smile, no sparkle. Just emptiness. Our eyes met. For a second, time froze. He looked startled, maybe even nervous. I could see the flicker of memories in his expression, the guilt, the regret, the realization. He walked over slowly. "Hey," he said, voice hesitant. "Hi," I replied, calm. "You look great." "Thank you." He paused, unsure. "I didn't think I'd see you here. I almost didn't come," I said with a small smile. "But I'm glad I did." He nodded, looking down. "I owe you an apology. For everything." I looked at him, really looked. For the first time, I didn't see the man who broke me. I saw someone broken by his own choices. "You don't owe me anything," I said softly. "You just owe yourself the chance to do better." He swallowed hard. "I lost everything, you know. My job, my reputation, even her. I heard, I said gently. But maybe that's where you start again. He blinked, surprised. You're not angry? I shook my head. No. Anger ties you to the past. I'm free now. He looked at me like he was seeing me for the first time. You really changed. I smiled faintly. No. I just remembered who I was before you forgot. He didn't reply. He just nodded, eyes glistening before turning away. And that was it, the true ending. Not with fire, not with chaos, but with peace. As the night went on, I felt something beautiful inside me. Closure. Not because he apologized, but because I didn't need him to anymore. I'd rewritten the story. I wasn't the girl who was betrayed. I was the woman who turned pain into purpose, silence into strength, heartbreak into healing. The people around me, the laughter, the music, the warmth, all felt brighter. Because when you heal, even the world starts to look different. Later that night, as I drove home, I rolled down the window and let the cold air touch my face. The city lights blurred into gold streaks like memories fading softly into the distance. For the first time in a long time, I felt complete. I thought about Ethan not with bitterness, but with gratitude. Because without his betrayal, I would have never found my strength. And that's when I realized the climax of this story wasn't about him falling. It was about me rising above the lies, above the pain, above everything that once held me down. The revenge was never about destroying him. It was about reclaiming me. And as I looked at the city skyline, I whispered to myself, sometimes the best revenge is becoming everything they said you couldn't be. I smiled, a tear slipping down my cheek, not of sadness but release, because the truth had finally broken through, and it was brighter than I ever imagined. The weeks after that night felt like stepping into a new season of life, one that smelled different, sounded different, felt different. For the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't waking up to anxiety. I wasn't overthinking every text or replaying old arguments in my head. I was just living. Each morning started with small rituals, opening the curtains, letting sunlight spill across my room, making my favorite cup of coffee, journaling a few thoughts before work. It wasn't much, but it was peace. And peace, I realized, doesn't come crashing in like thunder. It creeps in quietly, right when you finally stop chasing it. There was a time I thought healing meant forgetting, erasing the memories, pretending the pain never existed. But now I understood it differently. Healing wasn't forgetting. It was remembering without breaking. It was being able to look back and think, yes, that happened, but I'm still standing. My friends noticed the difference long before I did. You're glowing, Mia said one afternoon as we sat on the balcony sipping lemonade. I laughed. That's what people say when they don't know what's changed. Well, she smiled, whatever it is, keep doing it. I thought about that. Maybe I was glowing not from happiness but from freedom. The kind of glow that comes when you stop fighting the storm and start dancing in the rain. Work, too, began to feel rewarding again. My creativity had returned. I started taking on new projects, mentoring younger designers, and even volunteering for a community art program on weekends. Each brushstroke, each color felt symbolic, like painting my way out of the past. One Saturday, while leading a workshop for teens, one of them asked, "Miss Emma, how do you draw something that feels real?" I smiled. You don't try to make it perfect. You just tell the truth even when it's messy. The girl nodded thoughtfully, and I caught myself realizing how much that advice applied to life, too. Because truth, even when painful, always leads you somewhere real. A few months later, I took a short trip alone, the kind of trip I'd always dreamed about but never had the courage to take. A small coastal town 2 hours away. No fancy resorts, no schedule, just me, the ocean, and silence. The sea air was salty and fresh, the waves rhythmic and endless. Every sunset felt like a conversation between heaven and earth. On my second evening there, I sat on the sand with my notebook, watching the horizon swallow the sun. For a while, I didn't write anything. I just watched. Then, without planning, I wrote a single sentence. I forgive him, but more importantly, I forgive myself. And in that moment, something inside me loosened like a knot that had been tightening for too long. Because for months, even after everything was over, part of me still carried guilt. Guilt for staying too long. Guilt for believing his lies. Guilt for losing myself in someone else's story. But sitting there with the waves crashing gently in front of me, I realized I wasn't weak for loving. I was brave for healing. When I returned home, life moved forward naturally. I redecorated my apartment, replaced the old curtains he had chosen, donated the sweaters that still smelled like him, repainted the walls in soft tones of ivory and sage. Every change, every brush of paint, felt like reclaiming space that had once been haunted. Sometimes I'd catch my reflection in the mirror and barely recognize the woman staring back. Her eyes were still the same, but now they carried calm, a kind of quiet confidence that can't be faked. Then, one evening as I was closing my laptop, a message popped up. It was from Ethan. I know I have no right to ask, but can we talk? For a minute, I just stared at it. Not because I was tempted, but because I felt nothing. No anger, no longing, no ache, just stillness. I typed back a short response. There's nothing left to say. I wish you well. And then I hit block. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't pride. It was closure. The kind of closure that doesn't need words or explanations, just peace. Life has a strange way of rewarding you when you finally let go. Opportunities began opening like doors I didn't know existed. A local magazine featured one of my art pieces, The Bloom After Winter, a painting inspired by my healing journey. It was a portrait of a wilted flower coming back to life in sunlight. They asked me about its meaning. I said, it's about how sometimes we don't need to be rescued. We just need to grow where we were broken. The interviewer smiled. Sounds like a story behind it? I smiled back. There is. But it's not a tragedy anymore, it's a rebirth. A year later, on a quiet evening, I found myself walking past the same cafe where everything had started. It looked different now, renovated, brighter, filled with new faces. For a moment, I stood outside, remembering that frozen winter night when I'd first seen him with her. It felt like a lifetime ago. I walked in, ordered my usual coffee, and sat by the window, the same window where the truth had once shattered me. But now, instead of pain, I felt gratitude. Because without that night, I wouldn't be this version of me, calm, independent, whole. The rain began tapping against the glass softly, like an old song. A young couple at the next table laughed quietly, their hands intertwined. I didn't feel bitterness, I felt warmth. Because love, I realized, isn't the enemy. It's just that sometimes the wrong person teaches you the right lessons. Later, as I walked home, streetlights reflecting off the wet pavement, I whispered to myself, you survived the heartbreak. You found yourself again. And that realization filled me with a quiet joy, not the loud, cinematic kind, but the kind that lingers, that feels like coming home to yourself. I stopped by the park where Ethan and I had once spent Sunday mornings. Now, children played there, their laughter echoing through the cool night air. I sat on a bench and looked up at the sky. The stars were faint but steady, and for the first time, I didn't wish for anything. Not revenge, not closure, not even love, just peace. And peace I had. Sometimes people ask me if I'd take it all back, if I'd erase the pain, if I could. And my answer is always the same. No. Because every heartbreak, every tear, every night I thought I wouldn't make it, all of it led me here. To strength, to freedom, to me. The truth is, life isn't about never falling. It's about learning to rise, even when the ground is cold and unkind. And when you finally stand tall again, not out of revenge, but out of grace, you realize you didn't lose. You simply evolved. So, if you ever find yourself broken by someone's betrayal, remember this. You are not defined by what they did to you. You are defined by how you rise after. Because sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is simply refuse to break. That night, before going to bed, I looked out my window one last time. The city was alive. Lights flickering, cars passing, life moving forward. And I smiled, knowing I was finally moving with it. The storm was over. The chapter was closed. And for the first time in a long, long time, I was free. They say every story has an ending. But I've learned that not every ending is the one you expect or even the one you want. Sometimes it's softer. Sometimes it's quieter. and sometimes it's just peace. When I look back now at the heartbreak, the betrayal, the pain that once felt unbearable, it almost feels like it happened to someone else. Not because I've forgotten, but because I've grown beyond it. The truth is, pain changes you. But it doesn't have to destroy you. For a long time, I believed betrayal was the worst thing that could happen to a person. But now, I realize it was simply the beginning of understanding myself. If you've ever had your trust broken, if you've ever loved someone who made you question your worth, then you know that betrayal doesn't just cut deep. It reshapes everything. You start doubting your choices, your instincts, your goodness. You replay every word, every sign you ignored. You blame yourself for believing too much, for staying too long, for loving too hard. But here's what I learned. Loving deeply isn't a weakness. It's your greatest strength. Because it takes courage to love in a world where hearts break so easily. It takes faith to see the good in someone even when it hurts to do so. And it takes real power to love again after being betrayed. I used to think forgiveness was about letting him off the hook. Now I know forgiveness is about setting yourself free from anger, from resentment, from the heaviness that keeps you stuck in the past. There was one night months after everything ended when I couldn't sleep. The memories came rushing back. His laughter, his lies, the cafe window, the silence afterward. I got up, walked to the mirror, and asked myself, why does it still hurt? And then I realized it wasn't him I was angry at anymore. It was me. For allowing his actions to define how I saw myself. For shrinking, doubting, hiding, just to be loved. That night, I whispered something I'd never said before. You did your best, and that's enough. It sounds simple, but it broke something open inside me. Because when you start showing yourself the kindness you once begged others for, that's when you truly begin to heal. People love the idea of revenge, of seeing the person who hurt you fall apart, lose everything, get what they deserve. But here's the truth they don't tell you. Revenge isn't about hurting them back. It's about rebuilding you. My revenge wasn't loud or cruel. It wasn't a dramatic confrontation or a public exposure. It was simply this living a life that didn't revolve around pain anymore. It was success without bitterness, peace without permission, happiness that didn't need validation. Because in the end, the best revenge isn't payback, it's progress. When I saw Ethan months later, broken and regretful, I didn't feel satisfaction from his downfall. I felt clarity, because his downfall wasn't my victory. My peace was. One of the hardest lessons I had to learn was that closure doesn't always come with an apology. Sometimes you have to give it to yourself. No matter how much you want someone to explain why they did what they did, or to admit how much they hurt you sometimes, they never will. And that's okay. Because closure isn't something they can give. It's something you create when you decide the story doesn't control you anymore. I remember standing at that cafe window again, a year later, looking at my reflection. And I thought, the girl who cried here once is gone. The woman who replaced her is stronger. There were still hard days, of course. Days when the loneliness crept in, when old memories stung like fresh wounds. But healing isn't about never hurting again. It's about not letting the hurt define your life. I learned to give myself grace on the bad days and gratitude on the good ones. To understand that growth doesn't happen overnight, it happens quietly, in moments you don't even notice. Like the first time you laugh without pain. The first time you stop checking your phone. The first time you see a couple holding hands and don't flinch. That's healing. That's winning. Strangely enough, betrayal didn't make me hate love. It made me understand it better. Because love, at its core, isn't about possession or control. It's about respect, kindness, honesty, and space. I used to think love meant fighting to keep someone close. Now I know love sometimes means letting go and trusting that what's meant for you will never require you to beg. Someday I'll love again. But this time, it won't come from fear of being alone. It'll come from fullness because I already know who I am without someone else's approval. That's what true healing does. It turns heartbreak into wisdom. If you're listening to this and your heart is broken, if you've been betrayed, lied to, or made to feel small, this part is for you. You are not weak for caring. You are not foolish for believing. You are not unlovable because someone failed to see your worth. You are human. And the world needs more people who love deeply, even after being hurt. I know right now it feels like the pain will never end, but I promise, one day you'll wake up and realize it doesn't hurt the same way anymore. You'll breathe differently. You'll laugh again and it won't sound forced. You'll walk past the places that once made you cry, and you'll smile instead. Because healing is not forgetting. It's remembering and still choosing to move forward. In the end, my story isn't just about betrayal or revenge. It's about transformation. It's about how losing everything you thought you needed can teach you what truly matters. It's about how sometimes the universe breaks your heart just to open your eyes. And most importantly, it's about how the worst thing that ever happened to you can become the best thing that ever shaped you. If I could go back and tell that broken version of myself one thing, I'd say this. One day, you'll thank the person who hurt you not for the pain, but for the awakening. Because sometimes, pain is the only thing powerful enough to push you toward your purpose. Today, I live a life that feels light. Not perfect, not always easy, but honest, peaceful, and real. The woman who once stood in the shadows of someone else's lies now stands in the warmth of her own truth. I've learned that every ending carries a seed of beginning, that every heartbreak carves space for something more beautiful to grow, and that forgiveness, real forgiveness, isn't about saying it's okay. It's about saying, I deserve better and I'm moving on. So, here's the truth I'll leave you with. You don't need revenge to win. You don't need their apology to heal. And you don't need their validation to know your worth. All you need is yourself. The self that survived. The self that kept going. The self that believed in light even when everything went dark. Because one day, you'll look back at the person who broke your heart and realize they were just a chapter, not the whole book. And you became the author of your own story. So if your world has shattered, remember this. You can rebuild it. Not as it was, but stronger, brighter, and more you. Because sometimes heartbreak isn't the end. It's the moment you finally begin.